And we hope you're having a good morning. Thank you for staying with us on Citizen Extra. We want to take you live to a Mombasa court where the petition filed by the former senator of the county, Hassan Omar, challenging the re-election of Governor Ali Hassan Joho is underway before Judge Lydia Achode. Let's listen in.
If they wanted to, the petitioner should have just copied Hassan Omar and transposed it there. It would have been better. But you cannot depend in an affidavit that you're relying on another person's affidavit without stating anything yourself. And that was the difficulty we faced, because how do we cross-examine someone who is not saying anything? Because she's asking us to cross-examine her on the affidavit of another person. And that is in the second last paragraph of Halima Barre. This is the last case. And the last case, my lady, which I'm relying on, is Charles Were versus Joseph Magwanga in the IBC. This is election at Homa Bay. This is election petition number 1 of 2013 from the Homa Bay Court. Your brother, Justice Minor. Brother, Minor. Your sister, Justice Minor. Lady Justice Minor. And I refer the leadership to page 16 and 17, where the court considered in page 16, it is clear that he relied on rumors which amount to no more than hearsay evidence. Given that the onus of proof lies with him, his attempt to shift that burden to the court or to the respondents must fail. In Raila Odinga and others, the Supreme Court expressed themselves thus: while it is conceivable that the law of elections can be infringed, especially through incompetence, malpractices, or fraud attributes to the responsible agency, it behoves the person who thus alleges to produce the necessary evidence in the first place, and thereafter the evidential burden shifts and keeps shifting. In this case, the petitioner made generalized allegations which did not abuse evidence to prove. In Wangu Nganga and another, and George Owiti, elections petitions should not be taken lightly, and generalized allegations will not do. The position was upheld by Maraga J, as he then was, in Joe versus Nyange, where he stated, generalized allegations, as the ones made in this petition, are therefore not the kind of evidence required to prove election petitions. As I say, they should be proved by cogent, credible, and consistent evidence. So that in this case, my lady, on a number of other issues as well, but on question of hearsay evidence, my lady, it was held not to be accepted. It is not enough for the petitioner to throw defective evidence, and then say that it doesn't matter because replies have been filed anyway, that I'll prove my case in the responses, through the responses. The burden of proof first lies with him. If his proof is based on other people, evidence, then he should not have said anything. He should have said, I rely on the other people that will come and give evidence. In our case, my lady, the petitioner, and the first and second petitions, affidavits, the first petitioner's affidavit is based on hearsay, as admitted by him on the stand, should be struck out except for the analysis. And that is also subject to the other point of 106B, my lady. But the affidavit of Linda Schumer, the second petitioner, should be struck in its entirety as well, for the same breach. Lady, unless there's any questions the court may have for me, I think I'm much obliged.
You guys have covered it completely. Yeah. There's no loophole there.
Nothing. It's well covered. This is many. Yeah, many. She would like the one that
All right, the hearing of that petition in the Hassan Omar versus Ali Hassan Joho case. Of course, we'll have details for you in our subsequent bulletins. But still with me in studio is a panel. We're recapping yesterday's inauguration of President Uhuru Kenyatta and Deputy President William Ruto, and focusing very much on the president's speech. And now I want to turn to some of the near direct interventions that the president talked about. Leave aside the issue of unity, but I mean, he did talk about universal health care. He talked about, you know, the power reprieve that manufacturers will be getting. And in terms of what could have been offered to Kenyans, something to make us feel good, positive, uppity even. What do you think about those two measures?
When we look at the power, let me start with the power one. The reprieve given to power companies, I think, is in recognition of the fact that unless we revive our manufacturing industry and make it more competitive and attractive, we may not be able to get some of the investors who've been trying to court to get into the company. Remember, in the recent past, we have seen companies like Everready, the battery making factory, closing down. We've seen some of the plants that used to be very active in the past. We've been trying to revive pulp and paper. We've been trying to revive the cotton industry. And those were areas that had so many, they had a large absorption of labor, and were very good at creating employment. But in Kenya, we are not very competitive in terms of power. Our power is very expensive. And so if you're a manufacturing company, you'd rather look at somewhere like Egypt or look at somewhere like South Africa, because the energy costs are much lower. So in terms of reprieve to the common man, I may not feel it. But in terms of creating opportunities, let's get Philips back up and running. Let's get, like the companies I mentioned earlier, let's get them back up and running. And you'll find 2,000–3,000 people being able to be attracted into the job market being mopped up. Right. The other thing also it does for us is it makes us our products also competitive for export. Because if the cost of manufacturing is so high, when you try to export also, your prices are not very competitive. So at the end of the day, the way we are saying we are open for business with Africa, we don't want to just be consumers. We want to be able to sell our products out there. And if we are producing, for example, the time when we had the EPZ sale at KICC, and you're looking at very good quality clothes that have been produced and are being sold at almost Mtumba prices, simply because some of the tariffs have been knocked off, and you realize, look, we can afford to do this for everybody. Our women don't have to wear second-hand underwear. Right. We can actually produce competitive quality at a good price for local, also for the local market, as well as for export. And with us being a hub, you're looking at places like Southern Sudan, we are their lifeline. You look at places like Somalia, we are their lifeline. We look at Uganda and Tanzania, we do a lot of export into these areas. So if we are able to manage our power costs, it would be a big plus. Not only that, we need to look at renewable energy. That's where the world is going to. The way now we have to install solar for water heating, that's become low. I think from the end of November, it will become compulsory. So all of these things will free up more power to be able to go into manufacturing. So, for example, supply now will become more regular, more reliable. So factories know that we don't have to incur diesel costs to run energy, because all those people who are using electricity to heat water now are off the grid, so there's more power available. So there's some of those things that you can see at least are geared towards jump-starting the economy. And for that, for me, it's a win.
All right, Lily?
Yeah, I think it's very important to look at the overall gains. And I think that was a good move that they're going to get a reprieve from, is it 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. where they're getting 50% cut. And even just as we know that we can invest more and invite the private investors to come in, we are creating jobs for our people in the long run. You know, if you are to say this is what Mwananchi will get out of it. Of course, the big manufacturers will make their big time profits. But for Mwananchi, we are looking at what job opportunities are you creating? And then it trickles down. You get your Mwananchi having a small job, maybe his family starts a small business by the side, and you know, the economy runs. And the other thing I think I heard the president say was about inviting even trading partners. That has again to do with lowering the costs of investing or manufacturing. If we are going to lower those costs, then the traders will come in. They would not come in if those costs are so high. Power is very high for the country. We are still trying to find a way. Remember, years back, we had issues of even bringing in generators because we had, you know, lots of high tariffs from where we were sourcing power from. But I think now these are some of the areas the government needs to be thinking really hard, because I don't think we have reached where the government wanted us to reach in terms of creating job opportunities for Kenyans. And if we are to jumpstart the economy, if we are to look at the overall development of our industries, the giant manufacturing companies, then something big has to happen. And of course, we are talking of Vision 2030, getting us to become a middle income level country, and of course having 24-hour economy. That cannot happen if we are not looking at issues of technology, issues of power and renewable energy. So we must look at it holistically so that at the end of the day, we are getting a gain for the Mwananchi. It trickles down to Mwananchi.
You know, Javas, we saw just in the days before the inauguration, the president, I think twice, was it, meet with his economic team. Jubilee has been very keen in terms of getting back to its agenda, which is heavily development focused. That requires the political stability in order to deliver that. Do you think it was tackled adequately in the president's address? And what is the way forward to get our economy back on track and make Kenya still competitive whilst we are taking an open door policy to Africa?
Well, I want to pull the president's speech and place it squarely on the social development goals. And you look at it that all these things, it's an attempt to see how Kenya can rise up to, get to meet the social development goals. And you see, statistics are always convincing. And you see that, for example, even the president in his remarks spoke to about 500,000 Kenyans who have applied Nairobi-Mombasa Road. Because of that good road, etc.
The SGR.
And you know, the SGR, etc. You realize too that by way of history, example is always the best form of proof. For example, when he's he picked the very impressive situation of the 28-year-old teacher Jackson Wamai in Muranga, who was diagnosed with cancer and had to undergo dialysis, that previously used to travel all the way to Nairobi and now right now gets those services down in Muranga. It demonstrates that actually as a nation, we are moving in the right direction, only if we fix some things that are still a challenge. And that tells you that in his second term, he's got an opportunity good enough to try and see how, not only just a question of being remembered as a president having served 2 terms, but how we can lift this nation to the next possible level of development and progress. When it comes to matters energy, he talked about, yes, what my fellow panelists have spoken to, matters tariffs being lowered. But you know, those will benefit, especially manufacturers, maybe in the large industries or heavy industries. There are also those in, the light industries, that will be benefiting extensively from that.
Right.
But what about agribusiness? We need to find a way of farmers, whether they are large-scale farmers or middle-level farmers who want to tap into using electricity for purposes of making agribusiness work for them so that they can have much more money in their pockets. That seems to have been left out. And it's important also that we see as a nation how we can tap into alternative sources of energy without just depending on electricity alone. The world is moving. Would it be, I remember some time back, much as it seemed a bit ridiculous when Eugene Wamalwa was a minister and he was talking about Kenya venturing into nuclear energy back then, which seemed not to be a priority. But you see, the world is shifting and we must shift with it. And that is why, in terms of realizing all these social development goals, even if we're to tether them to the Vision 2030, etc., it is important that we have a harmonized focus in terms of leadership. And the honors is especially on the President Kenyatta, that he leads by example and then also reaching out to his political nemesis Raila Odinga and the other opponents to see how they can harmonize, polish up their vision to take Kenya forward. At times, losing is a necessity of life. And you see that those who may have not ascended to power may find themselves acquiescing to the realities of the moment. It is Shakespeare in his time writing through the play titled King Lear and speaking to us through Cordelia. He says, and I quote, that we are not the first who with the best intent may have incurred the worst. So our intention being the best, even if we incur the worst through circumstances or moments, we need to see how we pull ourselves up and raise our sights and imagination.
I just want to
days.
say that we quote Shakespeare on Citizen Extra. That's just who we are. Okay. But I want to focus a little bit more in terms of competitiveness, because Joy, you talked about the president, you know, appearing to pursue a Pan-African legacy by opening up our doors to the rest of the continent. There may be people who think, okay, that's good for you, Mr. President. Is that good for us as a people? So in terms of transferring those benefits, especially economic ones, to everyday people, because the sentiment has been, at least in the first term, that macro development is not translating to our micro development. We're not feeling any wealthier. We're not, everyday people don't feel like they have access to economic opportunity that much better. It appears to be the preserve of cliques, people who have, you know, who are a hop, skip and jump away from power in some shape or form. How can this administration in a second term really open up economic benefits to everyday people? How does everybody else jump in on this mega growth, this welcoming, you know, Africa to Kenya?
One thing that we have to thank God for is that now we have a CBK governor who, for example, during this turbulence of this year, was able to keep the shilling very stable. And so we've been able to have some form of fiscal non-turbulence during this season. But what we do not have is fiscal policies that are able to translate into more money in the market. And that is what you're asking, because in the bigger scheme of things, we're doing very well. For example, yesterday the president was talking about how Kenya is now number 56 in the world with ease of doing business, and we're looking towards getting to number 50. Now, that's something that sounds very good when you're talking on the world market, and you can see with him being invited to the G20, and you can see that the world is seeing something in what we are doing that maybe we just need a little, maybe we just need a little bit of patience for it to translate. Because we're comparing it to past years where, yes, there was money that was flowing, but our fiscal policies were in a shambles. One thing that I want to see is a reducing of this socialist mentality, where government feels they have to give handouts to the people so that the people can be able to make ends meet. Now, I'm not saying that we let the ones at the bottom fall through the bottom. No, I'm just saying if people have the opportunity to create enough wealth, then they don't need to worry about being able to afford school fees or being able to afford food, such that you tell us, you know what, we've started a program where we'll be giving people food stamps, or we've started a program where we'll be giving this free education, free secondary education, free primary education, free healthcare, is all geared to helping people feel the benefits of our wealth. But I wish we'd also take it a step further and try and generate the wealth. For example, let me use healthcare as one of the examples. I studied a little bit of some of the different systems where healthcare works. And in almost all of them, you'll find they don't just have an NHIF that pays for everything. It's a mixture. There is the way you're forced to save for NHIF, but there's also the way we are forced to save for NSSF, for example. And then you also have private insurance. So it's a collaboration between government and private providing healthcare for the people. But there's always the element of co-pay, so that the people have to participate in it, so that they feel that they also have a stake in the healthcare system. So how that works is that government creates the environment, the regulatory framework to ensure that every participant is adhering to the law. What do we have now? We have an NHIF, for example, that is trying to be very efficient. But the other day we just saw somebody coming and telling us, you know what, you can only have 4 visits a year. Some of those things you wonder, and the visits are to a limit of 1,500. You wonder, okay, so what benefit is this to the average Kenyan? Because outpatient is always spent. It would rather you tell the Kenyans, you know what, for every visit covered by NHIF, there is a copay of 200 shillings that is going to help you to move forward. That way you improve healthcare, you're able to pay for it, it becomes sustainable. Now translate that to what you're talking about, having major policies that are not trickling down to people. People need to get value for their money. If you talk about ease of doing business for investors, let also the Kenyan investor get the same thing. That's what Javas was talking about. Let not just the big boys get these tariffs and these subsidies and these benefits. Let also the ones who are starting out be able to get them. We are seeing the loans that they're giving women, the loans that they're giving the youth. Some of these funds need to be better managed. So the ones who are really at the bottom of the, who are really starting out, are the ones who are benefiting from it. So I want to see a policy where we help Kenyans to generate the wealth, so that if you have the money, you don't worry about paying for the service. But if you don't enable us to make the money, then at the end of the day, we are not able to appreciate what it costs to have those services.
And that also has something to do with, I suppose, the capacity for everyday Kenyans to absorb some of these interventions. Do you have the capacity to get into manufacturing, you know, etc.? Hold that thought. I want to just take a look again at what's happening across the counties and take you to Eldoret now, where we have a reporter standing by. There is the Uwezo Beyond Basics. It is a learning assessment that was done in 200 private and primary schools across 10 districts in 2016. They are focusing on Eldoret this morning and what the state of education is there. And John Wanyama is joining us now. And you have some interesting findings, including the fact that a class 5 pupil in Eldoret cannot read a calendar.
Very true, Anne, and those are very shocking findings that we have found in this report that were released today. That among 10 people who are in 10 pupils who are in class 5 in Uasin Gishu cannot out of 10 only 2 can read a mere calendar, how it's written. So, and that is another thing that is really shocking, especially for those parents who have their kids especially in class 5. And a question that most people will ask is how this may be child promoted from class 1 up to class 5 if he cannot really read a mere calendar. Another thing that we have found, Anne, is that pupils in Kenya, especially from class 4, 5 and 6, they cannot really read, write, and even just a simple word in English, they cannot really do that. Something also that is very worrying, as you can remember, is that Kenya, our subjects are almost all subjects apart from Kiswahili are said and taught in English. So you wonder how these kids will be now understanding these questions as they progress with the education. And as you know, we are now having free primary education, and we are also heading to free secondary education, as the president said yesterday. Maybe this research was done in 200 schools, and that is in the whole country. That's being 10 districts all over the country. And let me talk to Uasin Gishu County Education Director to tell us what does he feel about this. Is it really worrying when he gets some such a report? Bana Director, if you can tell us, are you happy with this report?
Yeah, thank you very much. The findings of this report are worrying, especially that element of children not being able to perform basic numeracy applications and basic literacy skills. And Uwezo Kenyatta has carried out this report is not new in carrying out surveys on classroom practices and whether children are reading or writing as required. And this particular report is worrying, especially in the sense that it may be providing us with a fresh challenge, even especially after addressing lower primary using the Tusome and EGMA, that's early grade mathematics interventions. We are now, as Minister of Education, now should be shifting to the transition classes, class 4, 5 and 6. And therefore, We have encouraged our head teachers, especially those ones who are subjects of, whose schools were subjects of this study, to study the findings and recommendations and ensure that solutions which are school-based are actually provided. And even as Minister of Education, as being supervisors of educational programs in the field, we are mobilizing our field officers to intensify supervision. And most important, I also want to point out that the competency-based curriculum, which is at the onset of being introduced in our schools, is going to address most of these challenges.
Thank you very much, and let me also talk to someone from Uwezo to tell us maybe what are the key pointers that you found, the findings that are really worrying in Kenya's education.
Thank you. One of the challenges is that learning is a crisis in this country. We focus so much on the inputs of education, how many classrooms we have, how many teachers we have, but we need now to focus more on what does all this translate into. So that is the greatest challenge, that you have got children who are exiting the system when they lack basic skills. And even the last week's results for KCP demonstrate the same, because we have got more than 250,000, which is a quarter of the population, that are leaving class 8 and they were scoring less than 200 marks.
Maybe what are these key pointers that you are looking at and saying this one is worrying? Our class 6, 4, 5 cannot read English, a simple English word cannot interpret even the calendar.
Yeah, that's true. It's important to put this study into context that the Minister of Education has a policy that requires that children should use English as a medium of instruction. That means that all learning should happen in the English language, and that is from class 4. So the question becomes, are these children ready to use English as a medium of instruction? And so when you reach a point where children cannot understand the language that they're supposed to be taught in, then it means that other skills that follow will be quite a challenge. And this is perhaps what explains the poor performance that we later on face in life. And one of the challenges is that we really have to think around capacitating our teachers. I was in a school and a teacher had written on the blackboard that identify an adjectives in the following sentences. And one of the sentences read, "She is a smart boy." And this was actually English class 5. So if this is a teacher who is teaching those children, it doesn't matter how long they'll stay in the class, the children will still come out with little, if any, skill at the end of the day.
Despite the government saying that they should be not, people should not be repeating classes, what have you found about this?
It's quite interesting that despite the government banning repetition and what they call automatic transition, 56% of the children have at least repeated a class. So you wonder that on one hand the government says that repeating is not there, but it's happening right in the schools and is pushed by certain factors. Performance being one of them, parents forcing that their children should repeat. But unfortunately, the very children who are repeating are the ones who are posting low results. So it means that repetition is not panacea to the learning problems. We really have to think around how do you support children that have not acquired these skills so that you accelerate their learning. Otherwise, just imagining that by holding them back by 1 year or maybe 2 years, it is not the solution to their problems.
Thank you very much, and those are few facts that you have found from this officer here, and it's very interesting that a teacher can write on the blackboard that she's a beautiful boy, and you can imagine if you are a student in that class, you, no matter how you stay in that class, you will continue knowing that the teacher, whatever he's teaching you, is correct. And as the government continue implementing new curriculum in this country, and maybe free secondary education, now the government has a place to start and a place to improve education system in this country. Anne.
Thanks, Onyama, for that report. So disturbing. Let's stay on matters education and return to Nyeri County. Martin Munene is standing by equally. I believe, Martin, with a report on the same. What can you tell us?
Once again, and thank you very much. And like you said, we are live from Nyeri County, and we got a report released similar to what my colleague Wanyama was actually talking about, a literacy report released that was actually conducted across the country, over 200 schools sampled, and the students were actually, they were basically trying to understand, one, if the students actually, their literacy level in English and also in mathematics, but also in critical thinking. And in interesting. It's actually interesting to find out that a lot of students who are actually in class 5 and class 6 have a problem. And one of the things that has come out clearly from the report that was released today is the fact that a lot of kids cannot read, but the most critical thing is that a lot of them cannot actually be able to write a passage. A class 5 and a class 6 student cannot be able to write a coherent passage that is basically explaining anything they want to explain, and therefore it is a major challenge. And also we found out from this report that children who have been enrolled in private schools are doing much better than their counterparts who are actually in public schools, of course pointing out gaps in the public schools which actually need to be bridged so that they can be able to actually compete effectively with those in the private schools, considering that these students actually sit for the same national examinations, and therefore students who actually go through public schools obviously will do poorly compared to those in private schools, because according to this report they are actually way behind according to this particular report. And I can say that according to this particular report, when it comes to the numeracy test, that is when it comes to the test that was looking at mathematics, a lot of children had no problems with subtraction and addition. That is those who are in class 5 and class 6. But when it comes to multiplication and division, they were doing terribly. A lot of kids in those two classes cannot actually be able to do mathematics that they should have learned 2 or 1 year earlier and be able to actually be promoted to the next class. But also interesting, according to this particular research, a lot of students and pupils, especially in public schools, are being forced to repeat classes, which is actually against the law, but it is happening. And therefore it is actually really shocking to realize that children have repeated, by the time a student is in class 5 or class 6, they've actually repeated classes twice. That means that they should probably be in class 7 or in class 8, but they find themselves in class 5 or in class 4, in class 5 or class 6, and still their performance is actually not good, because they are not able to competently solve problems that should be solved by a class 4 pupil. And just maybe to help us understand better what this report means, and maybe what is being done to change the status across the country, and in particular this particular county, let's just talk to one of the people who have actually released this report. So kindly just introduce yourself briefly and tell us what are some of the shocking findings that you found in this particular report.
My name is Emily Wairimu Mwangi. I am the partner organization representative for Uwezo Kenya, and we did this research and we were very much on the ground. And yes, I agree that there was some shocking revelation in terms of reading, but as we have seen and as we discussed with the teachers, it is basically because most people don't lay emphasis on reading. They don't really think it's important. And yet we know that reading is the key to anything that we do in school, and it should be started very early, right from the time a child is born. And this points to the fact that parents play a key role when it comes to children learning to read. Once you learn how to read, then writing comes naturally, and also comprehension, because the other very major problem was comprehending, that is connecting the dots between this and that. And but it's something that we've worked with the teachers. In fact, today we did not just launch the report, but the teachers that participated were represented here as well, and they have told us that they have seen marked improvement, because we discussed it with them in the staff room, and they actually gave very interesting ideas on how to solve these problems that are within schools.
And maybe to ask you, you say that reading is very important when it comes to a child's education. So as you went across the schools, especially the public schools who seem to be performing poorly, did you see libraries or resources that actually enable the children to be able to read and actually compete effectively?
Okay, the truth of the matter is most public schools don't have libraries, but we have seen Bookade International stepping in and community organizations like ours. But it is a problem because also the parents don't think it is important to buy a book. That we are not talking about curriculum books because you can cram it. We are talking about story books. We read something other than what the teacher teaches us in class, such as newspapers. Even if it is picking a paper on the road and reading, that is something that should be emphasized on. So the resources may not be that much, and we actually appeal to the government to not just concentrate on the curriculum materials, but to also lay emphasis on libraries. Libraries are the heart of any school institution. It is also noted that it plays a big role in academic libraries in universities. So if they can do it at that level, why not start it at the lower level? Because if you can be able to build a good foundation, then you don't have any problem at all.
And maybe finally, there's a big difference between pupils who are actually enrolled in private schools and their counterparts in public schools. What do you think, or what did you find to be the main difference between the two settings, the private setting and the public school setting?
Okay, we found that basically it's a mindset. They are teaching the same curriculum, but there's a difference. So the private schools really lay emphasis on reading as a priority before they even start lessons. We've seen these things in such schools as Mount Kenya Academy, where they have a program where every day begins with reading and then the teacher proceeds. Because if the child can hear you speak, if they can be able to read something for themselves, then you have set the pace for the day. In public schools, they follow strictly the guidelines of the government, at times to the expense of the reading aspect. Although they do teach reading, and there are teachers who go out of their way. We have seen them. In fact, if you noticed the latest results for KCPE, one of the best pupils was from a public school. Why? Because the teacher went the extra mile. We are looking for teachers who go the extra mile, teachers who encourage their children to read, to go beyond the classroom. You know, not just taking the English book and its stories and finish there, because even if you look at the past papers, they've really diversified. It has not remained the same. So are we teaching our children to think? Are we teaching our children to be able to take something when the teacher is not there and actually do it for themselves? Can you sit down with a novel of 10 pages or a short story and read? Especially like now we have holiday. The question is, what homework did they give the children? Did they give them a whole 3 chapters at the expense of telling them to read a storybook? How many storybooks have we set as a target? Because reading gives you vocabulary, listening gives you language.
All right, we apologize for that little challenge at the end of that report. Well, it's time for us to take another break. Thank you for staying with us on Citizen Extra. We're back with more after this.
Don't miss your chance to visit Egypt and Middle East Expo at TRM Thika Road Mall on the 3rd floor from 29th November till 12th December 2017. Open daily from 10 a.m. till 8 p.m. Entry free.
Ni hasira mdogo. Unajua mimi nishazoea kudhalilishwa toka nikiwa mdogo. Lakini sasa hivi sitakubali kudhalilishwa tena.
If you agree, I can put $500,000 on the table to start.
bring out food's natural taste. Fresh fry.